welcome to the CineFiles. Our usual host, Edwin Samuelson, couldn't make it for this taping. I think he's out buffing his GT Mustang. Before we go on, let's introduce our co-hosts. We have Jeff Galashaw returning to a CineFile seat, and as per usual, Mr. Michael Foltz. Anyways, today's subject is one dear to my heart. We are going to discuss films adapted from the plays of William Shakespeare. I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. Specifically, we're going to be dealing with history according to Shakespeare, as the four films we're discussing are technically historical plays. Joseph L. Mankiewicz's, I think it's 1952, production of Julius Caesar.
53.
Was it 1953? Well, thank you, sir. And where'd you find that out?
All of a sudden.
Huh? How'd you know that?
IMDb.
Oh, good for you, buddy.
That's the lazy man's guy.
Anyways, this movie is based on one of Shakespeare's more famous plays. It's a play that's taught in schools all over the country, largely because they think it's his least subversive play, but it's really not. But this movie is a traditional take on that production, and it stars James Mason, Sir John Gielgud, and Marlon Brando, who's not a sir, but could have been.
Should have been.
If we had a king instead of a president.
Surprisingly, James Mason was not a sir.
I don't know if you know what, he may never have been knighted.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. We're mistaken about that, but there you go.
No, I think.
But anyways,
I don't go into the history.
A little study about the Roman plays.
Edmund
O'Brien, who starred, for all you noir purists out there, he starred in the original DOA, and he was also in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh.
I enjoyed it. I'm not going to sit here and say it was one of my favorite films, but I enjoyed seeing all these actors all in one film, and it's not, a typical, let's say, a box office film, but I guess for back then it was. But, I mean, I was surprised Marlon Brando handled the language very well. But the biggest surprise was this was really, James Mason has always been a good actor, but to me, this was like one of the best performances I've ever seen from him. So I was really shocked about that. But, out of all the films that we're reviewing today, it was the most, I would say, if I had to pick like movies based on Shakespeare's plays, this one seems the more traditional.
It was, and they went about, it was always a tradition at the time if they're going to adapt Shakespeare to do it traditionally, because that obviously wasn't one of the first adapted Shakespeare's to film. But at the same time, I chose that one because it's pre-1960, and I thought it'd be interesting to see that contrast between that and the films as we go on up to present time. Why I find it interesting as a Shakespeare adaptation, you're kind of see a tradition, you're seeing a change, a transition in approach to both presenting Shakespeare and performing Shakespeare. Because what you got is sort of the old school kind of performance approach by Sir John Gielgud, who is kind of hammy in this.
Hammy, but good.
He's good, but he's kind of hammy. And to be fair, the character is written that way. It's meant to be that way.
I've noticed too that in the four films that we've reviewed and other Shakespeare films I've seen, it is very easy for an actor to be hammy.
Mm-hmm.
It is very easy,
or to be in love with the language too much that they forget it's a script.
It's very easy to be hammy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's why I wanted to.
Well, if you have to see him in Laurence Olivier's Richard III, which we're not reviewing. He's very hammy in that. He plays the role that Nigel Hawthorne plays in the film we're going to review later. Yeah, okay. He plays Clarence or Prince George, and he's all over the place, like, oh, these walls, all over the place. It's this old school kind of form of approach to Shakespearean acting. But what's interesting is behind the scenes, he trained Brando on how to act Shakespeare. Gielgud did. He helped him because Brando was insecure as all hell about pulling this off, and I feel that Brando brings out the best performance.
I was going to say, you never, ever
He's amazing in this.
He does, in this film, slow burn better than almost anybody. While he's talking, he does the slow burn. It's amazing. He broods. Everything is so...
And it's grounded in a certain reality.
One thing that I really... well, there was a few things I liked about this film. James Mason, which Jeff said was a really incredible... It was a real incredible performance.
Yes.
What was great about the acting that Mason was giving us with his character, and it was all in the face. I thought it was all in the face, which was, I have a lot of doubts about what this plot is going to be, but damn it, I want to do the right thing.
It's a hard thing to interpret in this play. There's something that's very specific, and Shakespeare even references it. Brutus and Cassius, who's a John Gielgud part, both follow separate philosophies that are diametrically opposed. Cassius was a Dionysian, which means that you go through life feeling everything, and if you have emotion, if you feel emotional about something, you just show it and display it. Hence why Gielgud approaches his part that way, sort of overwrought. If I'm scared, then be scared. You know, the whole thing. James Mason was a Stoic, which is sort of the ancient Roman equivalent of being a Vulcan. The philosophy is don't show your emotions, keep it in check, you know, be sensible, be reasonable, be logical. And the thing that I think was hard to get across in this is that James Mason's whole rationale for going into this, he delivers that's actually a very famous speech in Shakespeare canon known as the Serpent's Egg speech, where he basically says, you know, he's debating with himself, should we kill him or shouldn't we kill him? Well, you know, how do we know? You know,
and if we're going to kill him, we got to do it the right way.
Right, right.
I love that part of the speech.
If you really study the speech, it contradicts everything he's supposed to follow as a philosophy. And so you have to ask yourself why. What is it about this one thing where he feels desperate enough that it's important for him to go against his own philosophy?
Don't you think that James Mason does a lot with his face in this film?
I think he does, and I think that he's striving to be true to the concept of how that character is supposed to be approached. That is, you know, it all has to be in the face, but the whole body has to be still and what have you. I do think that James Mason does very well with the part. He's a movie star doing Shakespeare. I think he's very effective at that. I just think it's interesting seeing three actors with different approaches play different Shakespearean parts. You got James Mason doing, you know, being a movie star, playing the role like a movie star would, but very well. John Gielgud doing as if, you know, it's Shakespearean, you know, and then you have Marlon Brando who's doing the sort of the transition between the traditional form of acting at the time to the sort of modern take on acting. And I just find that Brando was just so amazing as Mark Antony. Not only does he capture, you totally understand why he's pissed off this is happening, but you also see the manipulation in him, how he's a bit of an opportunist as well. So, what do you think Julius Caesar's the best of the films we watched so far, or
no,
least of the films we watched?
But I would recommend. Look, we're at this point, especially you, who is steeped in the knowledge of Shakespeare more than the average Joe on the street. What we've got to say to our CineFiles fans out there is it's worth seeing just to see these great actors do this,
and it's not boring.
And it's not boring now.
So moving on to the next film, this was an early 1960s.
65.
1965. You've really been doing your IMDbing, man. I'm very impressed.
I tattooed that on.
We go into another traditional take on a Shakespeare history play. This is Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight, which itself has a very fascinating story behind it. This is a man who made this movie. Basically, he made this movie with whatever money he had until the money ran out, and he just waited until he could get more money to finish the movie. And one of the great stories is that he was allowed to make Chimes at Midnight. A producer gave him money if he would make Treasure Island, right? So he tricked the producer into thinking he was making Treasure Island by casting all the people he had already casted
and building the sets,
right? Building sets, and he used those sets, right, for actually. The producer found out about this and pulled out. So he wound up. He waited a few months, I think like 6 months, and then finally he got in contact with Harry Saltzman, one of the early Bond producers, and he gave him the rest of the money. But Chimes at Midnight is basically a bunch of plays adapted into one film. It's Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, with a bit of Henry V and a little bit of Merry Wives of Windsor, and the narration is from Holinshed's Chronicles, which is the historical text that Shakespeare got inspired by to write his British history plays. Where this falls in chronological order in terms of British history, Shakespeare wrote many plays following the whole thing. He did not write them in the order in that they happened, but if you took them in chronological order, you'd have Richard II, and then you would have the movie we're discussing now, which is Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. Henry IV's part 1 and 2 is basically a sequel to Richard II. And it deals with King Bolingbroke, or King Henry, who was otherwise known as Bolingbroke in the previous play, who had recently taken over as king. And
we get a return of our man, John Gielgud.
And Gielgud plays him in this film, and he is excellent in this. It's probably, I will say, pound for pound, my favorite Shakespearean performance by him, and that includes all the Olivier film versions that he's been in. Mm-hmm. But it basically comes at a time where it's been in turmoil because Bolingbroke, King Henry, kind of took the throne unfairly. And so you have certain factions that are unhappy with that, and you have the factions that are loyal. On top of that, the factions that were loyal to him, for political appeasement, he has to snub some of these factions that were originally loyal to him. Now they're pissed at him for being snubbed, which jumpstarts this civil war. Now, I think this film is absolutely fascinating, especially knowing how little money and how little resources he had to pull this together. It's a weird film in terms he has this international cast, half of whom couldn't speak English, which is why the entire film is dubbed, and half of those actors are dubbed by the voice of actors playing other parts in the movie.
Well, Orson Welles and somebody else did a lot of other voices.
Right. Well, the guy who plays
characters.
Prince Hal, I forgot the actor's name, but he dubs a lot of. I think he actually dubs Fernando Rey's voice. I mean, Fernando Rey is.
But they said Fernando Rey had a very thick accent, so they had to get through that.
So before you say what you're going to say, this I do not think it's Orson Welles' best film, but it's my favorite Orson Welles film. I feel it's one of the best Shakespeare adaptations I've ever seen, because all the problems aside, I think it is absolutely a fascinating movie to follow, and I think some of the performance in there, especially the actor who plays Hotspur, is absolutely heartbreaking.
Chimes at midnight. Anytime I see a new Orson Welles film that he actually had a hand in production, I have to say that it's a fascinating look, because I'm always amazed at what he can actually pull off. Personally, I like his performance in the film over everybody else's. I think that's also because he has one of the more interesting characters with the most interesting lines to say. I really enjoyed the battle scenes. I was shocked at how well filmed and how interesting it was. I must say, in all these
I agree with him on that.
in all these Shakespeare adaptations, I'm actually shocked at how not bored I was, because I have nothing against Shakespeare. I love the language, but usually when I've seen some other films that are based on Shakespeare's plays, I find myself getting very bored or very sleepy. This time I was in it from beginning to end, and I wasn't bored. The cinematography is like one of the best things in the film, because it seems like the camera knows when to stay still, but it also knows when to move exactly perfectly.
That scene when they're going to try to trick Falstaff into thinking that he playing the robber is being robbed, that whole tracking shot is just amazing.
That's what I mean. And then
I'm thinking, how they do that? Because they didn't have any money.
Well, that's a secret.
But
None of us will
you
ever
can
know.
look at it that way. Also, watching that battle scene, how the hell did he do most of
that
those
battle
camera
scene's
shots? That battle scene is phenomenal.
And it's brutal.
And it's like, it is almost 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
The Battle of Shrewsbury. And that's one, I just thought, this is done on a shoestring budget, and this is an amazing battle scene. There's no blood, mind you.
Well, there is a scene where a guy turns over and blood's gushing out of his forehead.
One of the things I thought was, this is an interesting time capsule film. Did I love the film? No. Did I like the film? I'm not even sure if I liked it. I felt like you've got to. This is an intimidating film.
Okay.
I'll tell you that right now, because you can get very lost as just a layman coming in to see this film. You can get lost with the language right away.
Totally understand
but
that.
what you have to do, brave viewer, if you can see a copy, and hopefully the rights one day will be all figured out, because you cannot get this on Netflix. We had a video pirate that burned it for us. And
Thank you.
it's actually, the property is owned by 3 different
Thank you,
families.
Supergrass.
It's owned by the original producer, Pellicino or something. The rights could be owned by the Wells estate, or it could be owned by the Saltzman estate. So there's a 3-way battle for the rights to Chimes at Midnight. So when it'll come on.
First time I saw it, they aired it during Shakespeare's anniversary, a decade and a half ago. I was like, what the fuck? They're showing this on PBS? Really? How? And I figured it was the only time they were going to show this, so I VHS taped that motherfucker.
I feel that this is the type of film that should have a Criterion treatment.
Yeah.
Yes.
However, I'm just going to say,
Got the
however,
best.
I think the way he shoots the actors and has the actors perform their lines, he kind of makes up for that density in that you do somehow get what's going on just by their body language and how they're communicating the lines, which I think is also fascinating about this film. He doesn't do the traditional, be Shakespearean, in your performance.
I want to disagree with something you said earlier. And I don't know if, Jeff, you feel the same way of this, but it was something that we were talking about with Julius Caesar, and how it's very easy to become hammy.
Right.
And sometimes that's good and sometimes
So you
that's
thought
bad.
there was more hamminess here?
with only one character, and the one character that you liked, Percy.
Well, that's because that's his character.
I thought his character was way over the top, and I kept thinking to myself,
That's why they call him Hotspur.
Oh, because I kept thinking, I was looking at him, and I was like, I'm tired of the close-ups of this guy's square teeth.
I would say where
and he looked like Eddie Izzard, didn't he?
I don't know if I'm agreeing with you, but I would say my problem with the casting of the actors and so much his performance, he seems to. Every time I see him, I'm like, you're too old for this part. You're supposed to be younger.
7 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Orson Welles did do Treasure Island.
Yeah, he did.
But it had nothing to do with the
original, which is hilarious. I want to do a quick just thing. I want to discuss a little bit on the authorship issue. There are plenty of people out there who don't think Shakespeare actually wrote Shakespeare, and there's been many suspects who probably did, right?
Including Roland Emmerich.
Roland Emmerich, yes. But I was going to say that it's just an interesting debate in itself. The main reason why people don't think Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare is because we know so little about Shakespeare, and there's all this stuff about, well, Shakespeare was poor, his father stitched gloves for a living. There's no way in hell this guy would have had the education to write all these fantastic plays. Well, the problem is his father did stitch gloves, but he also was part of city government, which means that his son certainly could afford to go to all the good schools. But I would say that that's sort of an interesting side
So are you
note.
saying all those Edward de Vere fans are full of shit?
Well, the Edward de Vere, okay, there's one of the more compelling arguments against Shakespeare is Edward de Vere, a.k.a. the Earl of Oxford, and people who are proponents of that are known as the Oxfordians. And he's the most compelling argument only because he was very wealthy, he was very well educated, he was a writer, he was a poet, and things happen in his life that parallel what happens in Shakespeare's play. But this is the problem. This is the problem all the people against Shakespeare have. Every single person they prop up as the real writer of Shakespeare either was too young or not born when the first plays were written and died before some of his best plays were written. Going on to the next one, now we're going to start to change things. We're going to go to a less traditional adaptation. We move to the 1990s with Richard III, starring Ian McKellen. There we go. My opinion, a fantastic film version of one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. It's interesting that we discussed Chimes at Midnight. Okay, this is the chronological historical order of the plays. Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, then Henry V, and then after Henry V, we have the epic Henry VI, Parts 1, 2, and 3, and then Richard III. Richard III is the sequel to Henry VI, Parts 1, 2, and 3, otherwise known as the War of the Roses. But Richard III literally takes off right after the last play ends. And I love this play. It's one of Shakespeare's longest plays, but it has this fascinating central character who is evil and douchebaggy to the core, but you just root for this guy, man. And Shakespeare has this wonderful device where he has Richard III directly address the audience and makes them complicit in what he's doing.
I drew a lot of parallels with the time of Hindenburg in Germany, and then the rise of Hitler and fascism. And I kind of saw those parallels, even though everything's based in England.
Now, it should be noted the actual historical Richard III was not hunchbacked, was not deformed, and was considered a very good king. But when Shakespeare wrote this play, that family was in disfavor with the current monarch. So he had to write bad things about Richard III.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
Did you feel at any time during this film that you were rooting for Richard III?
Well, I found he was one of the more interesting characters throughout.
I
the
found
whole
him
thing.
interesting, but I wasn't
Really,
rooting for the guy.
you didn't see?
No.
Because I think he's funny as hell. There's a lot. I mean, okay, me being a Shakespeare nut, I'm going to get the jokes. I understand that, but it's a very funny character and it's a very funny play, and just the way that he just plays everybody. You know, it's like your favorite UK gangster character. That even though what they're doing is despicable and you know that it's illegal and what they're doing is immoral, you still root for them. You still want to see them, make it to the end somehow.
Well, it's just like when most classical actors play in action films, they want to play the villains because they have the most interesting things to do in the whole film.
They have more to do.
Exactly.
But he's front and center of the lead.
I know. I'm just saying that's why, to me, he's
I admire
and
the
maybe
guy's
he roots for
guile.
him.
I admire the guy's intelligence, but I'm not rooting for him.
Huh.
You know, look, the York family, who's he's involved with, you know, some of those people you can say, well, they kind of got what they were they had what was coming to them in a way, but in other ways, it's like. No, this guy is evil throughout. And yes, he's trying to let the audience in on the joke, which at times was a little hammy. It's a little off-putting for me at first.
Okay.
But it really fits in really well.
But I love how he transitions into the restroom. Or the rest of that speech, I thought it was brilliant. Because the way the speech builds, it starts off with him making this great proclamation about this whole new world, this whole new monarchy. Everything's going to be beautiful. Everything's going to be great. Everyone's going to do this and this and this. And then he says, "But I am not going to do that. I'm going to do this, and it's all going to be mine." You know, it's just this brilliant kind of moment. And I love how it goes from this like big announcement, now is the winner of our discontent, make glorious summer by the sun, New York.
He is the
and then it ends up with him in the bathroom taking a piss.
is he is the ultimate bullshit artist. He will sit in the film and consistently lie to every other single character in the film. He will lie right to their face.
Everybody, and
even while something's going on, he'll lie to their face.
They cut it out of the movie, but there's a beautiful speech delivered by a character known as Buckingham, who's played by Jim Broadbent. And Jim Broadbent, Buckingham was the character, is basically his spin doctor. You know,
I forgot how well Jim Broadbent plays evil and weaselly.
Well, in the speech he delivers at the end when he realizes he's getting his comeuppance. He basically says, "I should have known," because he says, "I thought I was different. I thought I was his friend. I thought he'd be loyal to me." And with all these guys he took care of that were loyal to him.
Well, you get a little bit of that.
But he says, but there's this whole speech where he just basically says in a very cynical and pissed off way, "Well, you know, of course, you know, so I have to accept my."
Well, yeah, right before he's strangled.
Well, yeah, they did that for the movie. In the actual play, he's taken off to prison and killed in prison. Blah blah blah. But he did his whole speech. That's not a movie. But anyway, great cast. Nigel Hawthorne as Clarence, aka Duke.
I didn't even expect that.
AKA George.
That was right out of left field, because that was around the same time as the madness of King George.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then shortly after that, he died.
Annette Bening and Robert Downey Jr.
Fantastic.
cast as Americans. Brilliant choice in that. Kristen Scott Thomas. Wonderful. And I love that whole seduction scene between him and her.
I found that to be unbelievable.
Really? Why?
Just that this
little
woman could be like so emotional and so forthright with her hatred for him, but yet he seduces her by going to these extremes of talking about his love and her beauty and everything.
Really?
But I didn't find it. I wasn't scoffing at the
I saw
falseness
him
of it.
like psychologically playing with her. Pity me, feel sorry for me. Don't you've misrepresented me. This is who I really am.
The way the character's written, it's just it starts off the movie as this guy is going to be the master manipulator.
Yeah, but he's telling you that. He's not, but everyone else doesn't know that. Only you know that. You know, that's why, like, after he seduced her, he turns to the audience and says, how was a woman never wooed? How was a woman never won? He's basically patting himself on the back saying, I fucking aced that, to us. Don't forget what he's telling us.
Well, yes,
isn't what he's telling
everything. Every time he turns to the camera, he's laughing.
Yeah.
He's laughing at these people that he's interacting and conning.
This is one of the adaptations where the language really got dense for me, so I was sitting there like, I mean, I enjoyed the film, but half the time I was still trying to figure out what was going on. And so I got confused at a lot of parts in this film. And the second one, this is more trivial. The ending. I thought it, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but I guess the visual effects used made it more laughable instead of, oh, poor him. Even though he's a villain and he's supposed to, his fate, but it just made me actually laugh at the ending.
So you just give it a wormy apple. A wormy and a half apple. I don't know. Wormy apple, half a wormy
It
apple.
is. I would have to say, out of all the films we've reviewed, this was not my favorite. This was the one that was ranked the lowest.
What's funny is I could not disagree with Jeff Moore. Even though I'm seeing some of his points, I thought by far and away it was the best.
Whoa.
And I was surprised that I kept thinking, what else played this year? Because this should have been in the top 5 movies. I don't know if it was up for an Oscar or not.
I don't remember.
I know it was up
particular
for
year
several
went out.
Academy Awards, but I don't know if it was up for Best Picture, but it should have been. This film was fucking phenomenal from beginning to end. I was enthralled. And unlike Chimes at Midnight, I wasn't as intimidated by the language. I felt like even though you were still sticking with a traditional text, and of course with Sir Ian McKellen, you were going to stick with the traditional. This guy was not going to cut corners. I just felt it flowed. It just flowed.
Not only did it,
beautifully.
I thought like the approach to it made it understandable in a way that I hadn't seen in a Shakespeare film up to that point.
It was just
because
so
of
And I
the
thought
times.
they thought they edited it because this is a really long play. I thought they edited it just right. We had to move on because we just got the signal that we're down to 4 minutes. And unfortunately, because we have limited taping time today, we must move on. But it seems fitting that we move from this to another contemporary version of Shakespeare's play, Coriolanus, which came out 2 years ago, starring and directed by Ralph Fiennes. A very interesting take on what is actually a very interesting play. A warrior who fights for one country and is then betrayed by that country, so then goes out and volunteers to work for the people he fought against, and then betrays his own country because they betrayed him. And I saw this once a long time ago on stage with Christopher Walken and the Ralph Fiennes part. I remember liking it a lot. And I think that Ralph Fiennes approaches this in a very interesting way. I think sometimes it's hit or miss. There are times where I think he nails it. I think there are times where he's striving too hard to find a modern context for what's going on in the play.
Did you like the setting, the Balkan War type
I
setting?
think the setting was great. I think the performances, for the most part, were phenomenal. But I do think some were all over the place. I think there's some people in there that it felt like they were acting Shakespeare, and there are people who are doing it in a naturalistic way.
Was that gas?
No, because of what he said, what he just said.
What was that?
Certain actors. For the most part, the cast is phenomenal. Vanessa Redgrave, especially, but
Amazing.
But I've always been a Vanessa Redgrave fan, and
She's fantastic in this.
But certain casting I thought would be interesting didn't work for me, and it's well, to me, one of the more obvious. Gerard Butler didn't work for me.
Ooh, okay, I disagree with that.
I disagree with that as well. I thought
was actually
fucking
pleasantly
finally
surprised by his performance.
He can show off some acting because he's required to do so little in his film work. And I thought, and I can understand your criticism with Ralph Fiennes as being hit or miss, but I found him incredibly.
I think as a director was hit or miss. I thought there were elements where he tried to find like a modern context and failed. There's always a problem staging Shakespeare crowd scenes, and I thought that to me he kind of dropped the ball a bit because it didn't make any sense that character in that modern context would expose himself that way in close contact with all those people, and that seemed kind of clunky to me. There could have been a more creative way to do that. And I think there were scenes in sort of like broadcast news styles where some actors were playing it like it was modern and some were playing it like it was Shakespeare. I also have a problem with how he presented the suicide of Brian Cox's character. I thought he could have handled that a little more smoothly because the way it was edited or the text was edited, all of a sudden he felt depressed. He had to kill himself.
Yeah, I guess it could have been a little bit more.
It could have been a little more pronounced. But it's a fascinating, as a play, it's a fascinating piece of political theater.
But okay, now having said that, do you like the film though?
I like the film. I don't love it.
Would you recommend it?
I would recommend it.
Okay.
I would recommend it because I think there are moments where it's a very successful presentation of Shakespeare on film. I don't think it works throughout the entire film, but I still think it's worth seeing.
I think that a lot of film fans out there, whether they're CineFiles fans or not, will be intimidated by Shakespeare's works. Excuse me, and I think that both Richard III and Coriolanus make it more, because it's such a visceral experience, especially with the context of war, I think it makes it easier to, it makes it more accessible.
Our time's up, unfortunately. That's our take on 4 history according to Shakespeare adaptations. And this is the CineFiles signing off because we gotta go. We have to leave. Yay, verily, yay. Forsooth.
I like the unusual flavor of Thunderbird wine. It's an exceptionally good drink for every occasion. Thunderbird has an unusual flavor all its own. Not quite like anything I've ever tasted. I suggest that you try Thunderbird. It's really delightful.